So it's definitely a difficult period on the international scene. As you pointed out, we've just about getting out of COVID, but we've got the Ukraine conflict, we've got global economic crisis of sorts, and clearly the international community, the world is looking for solutions, and the G20 as one of the most influential global groupings is obviously the one that should be coming up with some of the answers that are important at this point of time. So our presidency comes at a difficult period at a global level, and I think the sense is that given the fact that among all the countries in the world, it's the Indian economy that today is among the fastest growing large economies in the world. Our economic fundamentals are strong. We have weathered the COVID crisis and public health issues with a great amount of, I would say, admiration from outside. The fact that we have also put in place digital platforms, we have put in place a development paradigm which has done a lot for our own people.
Michael Spence, the Nobel laureate, has said that India is a shining star in terms of growth, but he's also talked about the world is experiencing a regime change economically. Now G20 as a platform, like you said, is powerful because nearly 80% of the world's GDP, 60% of the world's population, 75% of the world's international trade. Would you agree with Michael Spence when he says that globally we are seeing a bit of an economic churn, and the G20 platform, how is India going to play or define itself in these times?
Well, I mean, globally, if you look at the fact that there is a certain rise of Asia, there is a certain global rebalancing in the economic and political sense of the term. At the same time, today, of course, we are going through economic crises of the sort that the world has not seen for a long time. High inflation, low growth, sometimes even recession, and very high costs of fuel and food and fertilizers, imports that many developing countries depend on very much for their normal economies. So in this context, I think the G20 is very important because, for one, it cuts across different both geographical, ideological groupings, north, south, east, west divide is all within the G20. You have in representational terms countries that are developed, the G7. You've got the large emerging economies, which is BRICS and others.
Yes.
And you've also got in place, as I said, different groupings right from, if you look at it from the point of view of political groupings, you've got membership for the Quad, you've also got membership of the SCO and the BRICS. So it's an interesting mix. And if this group of countries can come together to take decisions on macroeconomic stability, how to contribute to overall growth and stability in the economic sphere, I think it can make a huge difference. So you have the elements of polarization in the G20, but you also have the scope for the G20 to make that essential difference in the way we tackle global challenges of the day.
You talked about the polarization or these groups which are there within the G20 who want to assert themselves time and again. So do you also feel that India's position of strategic autonomy is going to get tested? Although G20 is supposed to be largely an apolitical platform, but we see political aspects weighing in.
Well, strategic autonomy is a choice that we make. In other words, we decide what we want to do in terms of how we want, whom we partner, how we align ourselves, based on our larger national interests. That's essentially what it comes down to. And don't forget the position that Prime Minister Modi himself occupies globally.
Yes.
Today he is one of the most sought after leaders globally. There is no international conference in which he is not invited. His views are not sought, and his contribution in all of this has always been very significant.
You see India becoming voice of the developing world, let's say a large southern bloc, a huge amount of the eastern bloc. We should see that if India can do it, why can't we?
External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has gone on record to say that India is perceived to be the voice of the global south. And I think the Prime Minister is very clear that the developing world looks to India to champion their own causes and issues. So whatever the issues that the developing world has are those issues that they expect India as president of the G20, as a leading developing country and a nation that has always espoused their causes, to take up these issues. And today, honestly speaking, I think developing countries are at the receiving end of much of the global situation that we spoke about. I mean, there are 70 countries that are in a state of indebtedness.
Yes.
Small developing countries. Many of them have single sources of revenue like tourism. COVID has impacted very adversely, but then the Ukraine conflict continues to also extract its impact on some of these countries. Now, these are the countries that really look, I mean, I'm talking about more vulnerable countries in our own neighborhood, in Africa, Pacific Islands, small island states. So there are concerns all around. And I think it would be important for us to try and get a sense of those sentiments, have them articulated in a positive manner. And I think the rest of the G20 would fully agree and support that endeavor to ensure that there could be solutions found to problems that developing countries face. And obviously there is no doubt today that we have to move towards a cleaner, greener world. Our economies have to change, the way we do conduct our lives and business has to change. And lifestyle for environment is really the mantra that we want to promote in the G20. So in all of this, how can we ensure that there is that support to our collective endeavors? I mean, India, for example, has made very, very strong commitments towards climate change, producing 500 gigawatts of renewable or non-fossil fuel energy in terms of installed electric capacity by the year 2030 is a gigantic task, considering that our total installed capacity, including fossil fuels, is 450 gigawatts. We are going to create a parallel, I would say, capacity by 2030. That means that you have to invest a huge amount of money. So while the Indian private sector has committed very, very significantly to this endeavor, you do need global financing at concessional rates to be able to achieve those objectives, and many of the developing countries that want to do the same have to be helped in that regard. And India has already contributed through the International Solar Alliance, to the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And I think we need to, as President of G20, do more to bring about a consensual approach to sorting out some of these or resolving of finding solutions to some of these problems.
No, and somewhere we are also walking the talk. We are also showing nations that it can be done. You can bridge that gap. That developed countries have already gone through a particular process and they are stopping developing nations from doing it, and that's been an issue for a while, and we've been able to do it. But then when we talk about nations in strife, financial distress, then comes the big elephant in the room. And there is no G20 without China, but most of the problems that we are seeing around is because of this nation. Its hegemonistic approach, its debt trap diplomacy, wolf warrior diplomacy, however you want to see it, even COVID. This resurgence of COVID, again, China is at the center of all this problem. So how is India going to negotiate this? Are we going to be able to build or work towards trying to build a certain amount of pressure on China to mend its ways? Or what's the approach going to be?
So global solutions can come about when the world comes together to put its shoulder behind that effort. Today we have that opportunity as the leader of the G20, and it's important that we carry all those countries, whether they are on the receiving end or they are in many senses leading economies, leading countries. We need to bring them together to find solutions, and I think that is what we are trying to do. Mentioned China. China is a member of the G20, and they have in the past contributed to the G20's efforts. And there is no doubt that every member of the G20 will want to work together with us under our presidency to see how we can find solutions to the pressing needs of the day.
But is it that easy to navigate, Shringla ji? Because see, Prime Minister and Xi Jinping shake hands, they meet at the time in Indonesia, and immediately weeks after that Tawang happens. Now we're going to have what, more than 210 meetings across 56 cities. China is going to be a part of a lot of these meetings. How are we going to engage? Is it easy to compartmentalize and put it in silos? Russia's presence, America in the room, Ukraine there, Europe there. It's not going to be an easy one to balance, as you were mentioning.
Well, nobody said this job would be an easy one. And I think, if the entire world acknowledges that we are taking over the presidency at a difficult time, but they also, as you correctly pointed out, that there is also an acknowledgement that if any one country and any one leader of global stature can deal with this issue, it is India and Prime Minister Modi who can actually step up to the plate to bring the G20 together, and the G20 itself, comes to try and contribute to this difficult position that the world finds itself in today.
Well, one of the aspects is China plus one, or look beyond China. Does that become part of the discourse? Is India going to also showcase itself as an alternate in terms of being integrally part of the world supply chain? Because Prime Minister has also talked about it. We've pitched ourselves as an alternative.
Well, I think it's important to look at ourselves in terms of our own intrinsic abilities and not in a comparative sense. We today, under Atmanirbhar Bharat policy, have really strengthened our own inherent capacities and capabilities. And that's been backed up by good policies. You have the PLI, you've got Gati Shakti in terms of infrastructure development, you've got provided incentives to industry not only to expand manufacturing capacities, to also draw in investments. And there are some very good examples out there where you've been able to draw in investments in critical areas, electronics, renewable energy, power, and so on and so forth. And I think what we have managed, if you look at the COVID times, for example, you remember that when the first wave struck, we didn't even have the ability to put together ventilators. There was a shortage of all sorts of equipment, from PPE kits to simple masks, which needed components that came from outside. We were part of supply chains that clearly were not as resilient as we would have thought. But Indian industry and and I would say supported by the government, reacted very quickly, and within a few months we were producing far greater quantities than we needed. And today we are an exporter of all of these items.
Correct.
The second wave, we found that there was a shortage of liquid medical oxygen, and we've really ramped up capacities today. Every district has a pressure swing absorption plant. Every large hospital has its own internal oxygen generating capacity. Today, if we were to look for liquid medical oxygen, if any part of the world were to look for it, India would be a natural producer of that. So what I'm saying is we have strengthened our capacity significantly in every area, and we have to some extent insulated ourselves from crisis in the future by these actions. But this is work in progress, and I think we will continue to work towards not only I would say improving our own internal capacities and inherent strengths, but also in doing so contribute to the rest of the world in whichever we can. As I said, whether it is through digital transformations, providing digital platforms that have worked in India in scale across the world to the developing world and anyone who needs it, or it is through our pharmaceuticals and manufacturing capabilities, or it is through our public health experiences, whether it is Ayushman Bharat, or whether it is the CoWIN platform. I think we have examples that or financial inclusion. Prime Minister mentioned at Bali, at the Bali summit, that 40% of global digital transactions are through the UPI. The absolutely stunning statistic. And from that perspective, I think we today can say with confidence that the scale that we have and the demonstrated ability to make that difference to our own people is something that we can take across. And Prime Minister also pointed out that he said there are some very large number of people across the world who are without ID cards. And we can again make that difference, that we can contribute to getting ID cards to some billions of people in the developing world who don't have that, through technologies that are simple, cheap, and easily implemented.
But that is something which we are philosophically also practicing, because we've talked about one world, one family, one future, one earth. We are also talking about one earth, one health, which you talked about. One of the aspects there is, and that's got stuck at the WTO, is the TRIPS waiver. Now, if you have a resurgent COVID, if you're going to push for vaccinations, and now it's the time that it has to go to nations which have not got access to it, is this going to be an agenda that India is going to try and push for, to try and bring a consensus at the G20 platform so that it finds passage at the WTO?
So, reform of multilateral institutions, I spoke about the Bretton Woods institutions. Another institution is the World Health Organization.
Correct.
We really need to work towards a global, holistic global health architecture that can help us in dealing with pandemics in the future. COVID is not yet over, as we've realized, but we also need to make sure that at the international level there are systems that can make us or enable us to deal with such crises or pandemics in the future in a better manner. And COVID has been a wake-up call. Similarly, I think the WTO also is an area where we can work with our partner countries in bringing about essential reforms that can make it a body that can respond to the needs of the day. And I'm sure that these are endeavors that we will be taking up.
You'll be taking up. Let's now get to some of the political domestic part of it, where there are cynics who would say this is of course a rotational presidency, so why make such a big song and dance about it? What's the big deal? How would you respond to that?
So we did talk about the time that we find ourselves in. You know, at a global level, in perspective, it is a especially difficult time. COVID was the greatest shock to the international system since the Second World War. We had the Ukraine conflict, which was unimaginable, but its impact is affecting countries that have party to the conflict and countries that are far away from the Ukraine. It's a very difficult time. Within our country, we've just come out of COVID. We are a resilient economy. We've proven to be a resilient economy. We are also on our 75th year of our independence, but we are going into Amrit Kal, which is the next 25 years that will take us to the 100th year. We want to become a developed country by that Amrit Kal period. We have our ambitions, a $5 trillion economy, a $10 trillion economy, and then $30 trillion economy. So we are really a country on the move. Demographically, we are a young country, an aspirational generation, and I think we have all that it takes to provide leadership at a global level. Now, the G20 may be rotational, but the fact is that today we have a presidency at a unique time, and we intend to make that unique difference. I think if we were to say that this is rotational, let's deal with it routinely, I think we would not be doing justice to the 1.4 billion people of our country. We will not be doing justice to the people of the rest of the world, especially the developing world, which is looking at us for solutions at a difficult time. I think that is not the approach to deal with this. The approach today is to deal with it in the way that the people of India want. They want us to take this opportunity and run with it and never look back again.
So, yahi samay hai, sahi samay hai is what you're saying, just like the Prime Minister said.
Yeah.
But Harshvardhan ji, there are also those who are saying that the PM will milk it for Lok Sabha 2024. So, it's not about Amrit Kal, it's about the next 18 months, and that the PM will try and build it up and try and use it to try and for success, electoral success in Lok Sabha 2024, because India passed on the presidency earlier, deflected it towards Indonesia. 2023 was ideal timing. That's why we've taken it now. How do you respond to that?
We spoke about the fact that the Prime Minister's own stature globally is a reflection of where we have taken our country. In other words, in the last 8 or 9 years, India has come a long way. And as a diplomat who's seen it, when I was 10 years back in some of the stations across in different parts of the world, and how I saw it in the last couple of years, this is a paradigm shift. Take the United States, for instance, where I was ambassador. As Indian ambassador to the US, I could get access to just about any personality or any institution in the US, because India was a country that they regarded as a country not only on the move and a country that was economically on the ascendant, but also a strong strategic partner. The Prime Minister's stature in terms of the fact that he had a close relationship with President Obama, President Trump, and today President Biden is also reflective of the fact that his views and his judgment, not just on the bilateral relationship, but the global on global, on finding solutions to global challenges is something that I think we have to take into account. So I think, you have an international stature that is defined by our own inherent strengths and capacities that you have developed over the past decade or so. And I think that is what is important. I really don't think that, what the G20 is a culmination of all of those efforts. And it happens to be towards the end of a decade of good governance, strong global outreach, and the building of a confidence that India has, and the people of India have, and the people of the world have never seen in India.
So you're saying it's not that the timing has been chosen, it's just that it's coinciding towards a particular thing. But would you say that there will not be a certain level of milking domestically? What is going to happen?
Everything that you do in the country, by that I mean what the government does, what the Prime Minister does, is in the best interest of the country. Now, if you choose to look at it, in a political perspective, that's different, and I cannot comment on that. But as a citizen of India, as someone who has worked in this government, I can say that every step of the step that the Prime Minister takes, every decision it takes, and every step that the government takes and decision it takes under his leadership has made India, I would say, stronger, inherently more capable, and more confident, and that is what matters ultimately.
Final question, Harsh Shringla ji. 214 plus meetings that India is going to be having across 56 cities. So this is like the length and breadth of the country. So it's going to be not just hair-raising challenge for you, but what should people expect in these cities when G20 comes there? What is it that they should expect, or what is it that you hope it will do in these cities?
Well, first of all, let me say that no president of the G20 has ever broad-based the G20. You've had large federal, structures like the United States and Indonesia that have tried to take it out. China, for example, has tried to take it out to 14 cities, Indonesia to 25 cities, the US to 12 cities. We are taking it to 56 cities across the length and breadth of our country. And I think the Prime Minister's vision in this pan-India endeavor is to make G20 a part of every citizen of India should become a stakeholder in the G20. It is not a remote event that is happening in New Delhi. We've had international events in Delhi. We had the NAM, you had the CHOGM. How much did the people of India relate to these events? I'm not sure. It is 1983, even before I joined service. But in today's context, what you want is that states should be a part of that effort, individuals should be part of that effort, and everybody should know what the G20 is and what India's presidency means for them. And there should be some resonance of it to every individual in the country. So.
Welcome everyone, you're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Shivani Gupta. Pandemic politics is peaking again, but the battle is not so much over the number of cases in India or the vaccinations right now. The entire political fight is over the Bharat Jodo Yatra. From calling COVID a bahana to talking about the chronology of the health minister's letter to Rahul Gandhi to suggesting that there is just a ploy to stop the yatra from entering the national capital to now even mocking the Prime Minister. Is the response to the health minister's advisory by the Congress party hurting its own image? And is the yatra politics itself